Welcome back to Ladies of Another View. Now, we've been doing this show for going on 5 years now, and we've seen the pendulum swinging from, oh my gosh, what's happening? How has corporate America lost their mind? To coming around to a little bit more sensible, for realizing like these DEI policies are racist. But Stefan Padfield, who is the executive director for Free Enterprise, is going to join us because he is taking on this fight up close and personal. He's going to tell us what's going on. Welcome to the show, Stefan.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You recently put out a press release and you talk about Walmart, PayPal, Netflix, and the alphabet held accountable by conservative shareholders. Tell us what that's about.
Sure. So we have basically just come out of the height of shareholder proposal season. So we've been very busy going to meetings, defending our proposals. And so we had a number of them come up in a recent week that are the ones that you've listed. And in fact, I have my own little list here because I need to remind myself what all the specific initiatives are. But really quickly, I can just highlight the substance of each of the proposals, and then we can talk about whichever you like in a little more detail. So at Walmart, we actually applauded them for the movements they've made back to neutral and away from DEI. But we did have some concerns about the fact that it basically took Robbie Starbuck exposing the substance of their DEI programs for them to really make a shift, which suggests that there was something problematic in the corporate governance. And so our proposal was to request essentially a report on why did it take so long and why did it take this sort of public shaming before they actually recognized the problems with their DEI initiatives. At PayPal, we were looking at the risks of some of their charitable contributions, specifically with the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Human Rights Campaign, and the ways in which, while those sound great on the surface in a lot of ways, what's really going on under the hood is extremely problematic and can arguably be a funding discrimination against conservatives and religious individuals and groups. At Netflix, we highlighted specific affirmative action initiatives that they still have on their books. And certainly that is a huge risk after the recent Supreme Court opinion that struck down affirmative action in the context of college admissions. And then finally, at Alphabet, we specifically asked them to sever their ties with the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index, which is essentially a lever to push quite radical transgender ideology.
Well, I mean, everything happened so quickly. And we were, right before we came on the show, we were talking like it was slowly building. A lot of us were unaware. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it seemed like everybody, all these corporations were losing their minds. And I thought, how could this be happening? Why aren't there more people that are a little bit more rational and not really ready to jump into the DEI lake so quickly and so radically? What happened there?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely a confluence of different types of individuals. So you definitely have the radical activists. And I was just reading earlier today, I'm working on a project sort of digging into a little more, like a lot of people have already, this long march through the institutions by the cultural Marxists, very purposeful, very intentional. So you have people inside these organizations from top to bottom who are all in on this neo-racism and this neo-Marxism. And we can certainly unpack that some more. But then you've also got other individuals without whom this would have never worked in the way it did. So you've got the opportunists, right? So when you've got, for example, a Biden administration that is pushing something, like the ESG initiatives, like the DEI initiatives, essentially saying we're going to have DEI, pro DEI throughout government. Well, a lot of opportunists just read the landscape and say, well, that's where the money is, and we're going to go that way. And also for a long time, they thought they could basically stiff arm their conservative stakeholders, and we wouldn't do anything, right? Because we're quote unquote pro business. Then you've got, whether you want to call this group useful idiots or rationally ignorant, I think both are applicable. but people who either don't want to know or are simply too stretched in terms of their time commitments, which is completely understandable, to do anything other than just see the nice sounding words, right? So who could be against Black Lives Matter? Who could be against diversity, equity? You go on down the line. Who could be against gender affirming care, inclusivity? It's only when you dig into what each of those terms means in practice that you find out, oh, this is really bad in so many ways, right? And so that allowed that movement and that agenda to get very far before anybody, sort of looked up to see what was really going on. And then finally, you've got the folks that I will, again, it's not a perfect label, but for lack of one, call cowards, right? And I want to emphasize that when people are afraid to speak up, it's very understandable. Because even now, we still live in a culture where if you speak up against DEI, if you speak up against gender affirming care, you're still liable to get quite a bit of, pushback, potentially being canceled, fired, all those things. So it's understandable that even as people started to ask themselves, what's going on here, and this seems bad and this seems wrong, that they might have stayed quiet. And so it really was a confluence of all those things. And then you had basically the perfect storm in 2020 with the killing of George Floyd and the riots that followed, and that built upon 2008 when corporations had already leaned into wokeness to try to avoid Occupy Wall Street consequences. So it's just a series of events and the intellectual history and the actual activism that just came together in a way where it seemed like it just sprang out of nowhere, but it actually had been building for quite some time.
And we've watched a lot of it build, and for me, I've got a question. Like, can you give me an example, like at Walmart? So you said that they've really turned their policy around. Can you give me an example of one of their policies, that they changed?
Yeah, so I think off the top of my head, I would be at a little bit of a loss, but I can tell you a great place to go is if you go to Robbie Starbuck's social media. So, for example, on X, he does a very great job of listing very specifically what each of these companies that have turned back to neutral in some meaningful way are doing. So it can be everything from we're going to get rid of employee resource groups that are based on race, certainly getting rid of anything that looks like a quota, right? We're going to stop having our pay aligned with diversity initiatives. We're going to stop making charitable contributions and funding based on race. So it can certainly take a broad swath all the way to just completely getting rid of DEI. Although then we get into the whole conversation of, are they just renaming it and rebranding it? So has to be constant vigilance. But it's those sorts of specific things. And then we get to the Human Rights Campaign, the Corporate Equality Index, expressly severing ties, not being a platinum supporter, not filling out their survey voluntarily, right, which you don't have to do, and most of those corporations don't do it for Alliance Defending Freedom, which has a conservative perspective. So, right, just saying we're not going to do that anymore. So those sorts of very specific actions that move the needle tangibly, which again, we should all applaud and support and defend them when they get backlash from the left, but at the same time still hold them accountable so that they're not just, again, rebranding or just burying the initiatives behind some less prominent disclosures.
Yeah, for instance, Target really took a lot of backlash when they had all the rainbow and transgender and Pride Month, and people were just disgusted, even swimsuits and for children.
Swimsuits where you could hide things.
And this year they did a patriotic theme during the month of June. So I guess I've not liked Target for a lot of reasons over the years, but I thought, well, if they're
still not shopping.
If they're gonna, I got a problem with that too. But I mean, I thought that when they do something that supports our values more, that it makes sense that we would respond. We're going to take a break, and I want to know a little bit more about like how much money is behind this, because I think a lot of them jumped into the whole DEI in the ESG scores because of money and business loans. And now if they're swinging back the other way, why? Are they just doing it out of the goodness of their heart, or is there some money and incentives involved in that? We'll talk about that when we come right back.